Ex-cult members, what is your story? How did you escape? I was born and raised in a super right-wing sect of evangelicalism. Church of 70 to 80 people, everyone homeschooled, most other churches were viewed as heretical/of Satan. Growing up I was called into the pastor's office and interrogated for reading Shakespeare, having friends outside of church, not admitting enough sin during public prayer. Best thing that ever happened to me was being born gay. Parents sent me to Christian college, like creationists/kick you out for drinking alcohol/having straight sex Christian LOL. But then I got into a really good law school, came out to my parents while I was there. Just like that, almost every relationship I made between birth and 20 years abandoned me. Made leaving super easy and I've never been happier. Now I have an amazing partner, awesome job, and wonderful friends. Some baggage is still there but I'm so happy to be free.
It's interesting how your upbringing shaped your experience. It sounds like the strict environment was tough, but finding your true self seems to have really changed things for the better. Losing those relationships must have been hard, but it looks like you're in a much healthier place now. It's good to see that you have a supportive partner and a fulfilling job.
Tons of people joke about this, but getting out is seriously hard. Even though I got out of the cult years ago, it is something I think about, and something that still affects me to this day. My time with the cult was the best of times, and the worst of times. I felt so loved, like I belonged, like I had a real family. That is how I ended up in it. We went to a service to check it out, and they were so friendly. It takes time before they say things like, you don't have kids because you are cursed by God. Or they talk to your husband about how uppity his wife is and how he needs to make her submit more. Thank goodness my husband is the type to say, she is her own person with her own mind, I don't control anything. And then when you go to leave, and you look around and you realize you don't have any friends except the people in the cult. You realize that the years that you have spent in this fantasy world have taken everyone you knew before and swooped them away. The people you loved like family say cruel things, and then you are shunned, and it is as if you never existed to them. It's hard, so hard. It took years and years for my husband and I to make friends, and even now we hold them at an arm's length. Oh, and I must not be cursed by God anymore because I now have 2 beautiful daughters. Thank goodness I had them after I left.
It's a tough situation to deal with. Leaving behind that sense of belonging and community can be really hard. The way they manipulate people's feelings and relationships is pretty brutal. It's good that your husband supported you through this and that you've been able to build a family outside of that environment.
I lived with the Moonies for a few years. They do the smother with love thing and sort of guilt trip you a lot. The thing is, I had a lot of fun there. I pretended to believe their thing and stick around until I got tired of it and they started to get suspicious and see me as a bad influence. To stay sane I'd sometimes buy some weed and leave for a few days. Then I'd come back. I didn't have to work much, got to go to Korea, have some road trips, live in California on the cheap. The only thing I missed out on was sex. They were actually moral people who thought they were doing the right thing. No orgies, no sexual drama. It was straight as an arrow. In the end I felt bad for them. Their leadership was corrupt and funneled a lot from their believer base to the upper echelons.
It sounds like a unique experience living with the Moonies. They seem to have a strong approach to community and beliefs, but it's interesting how you manage to navigate that while having your own fun. It's a bit unfortunate about the leadership and the way they handle things. Overall, it seems like a mixed bag of good times and strange vibes.
My parents were born into it. They had 6 kids, of which I'm the eldest. I realized over time that the place was toxic, pedophilia, especially in the leadership, and that the things we did weren't normal and we couldn't live properly within the cult. I wanted to leave but I couldn't just abandon my family. While we were living in Europe my parents had to consider a new place to live after our visas expired. We're all American but lived in Europe most of our lives. I was around 20 and I told them I was moving to the US because I wanted to go to college. They decided to come with me because they needed my help and together we worked to distance ourselves from that previous life.
That sounds like a really tough situation to be in. Growing up in a toxic environment like that must have been challenging, especially with the pressure of family ties. It's good that you sought a better path for yourself and your family. Moving to the US for college is a big step, and it seems like it helped you all start over. Glad to hear you found a way to distance yourself from that past.
I wasn't, but my dad was. My grandma is pretty nuts, fun for a weekend, but I can't even imagine having her as a parent that you live with every day. Things like chasing her then husband sound with a chainsaw and not remembering it. She goes by Peter because she believes she's the reincarnation of the Apostle Peter. She also got them into several communes and cults. Easily the funniest story from that is when the leader of one of them started claiming to be the second coming, and without skipping a beat she laughs and says, "No you're not, I knew him." They were immediately kicked out.
That sounds wild. Your grandma seems like a character. Chasing a husband with a chainsaw is definitely not a typical day. I guess she doesn't hold back.
Not me, my aunt. When I was around 8 she decided to stop celebrating birthdays, holidays, etc. Fast forward 2 to 3 years, all of a sudden she writes my grandparents the longest letter ever about how her and her husband had packed up the kids and moved to Texas and joined a church called the House of Yahweh in Abilene, Texas. For a lot of years she wasn't able to call or write them. When she finally did start writing them, she always included pamphlets and stuff from the church and basically told them that they weren't living their life the right way if they didn't join her church. I've spoken to her twice in the last 17 years and each time was to let her know that one of her parents died. She has not been back home since she moved away. No visits or anything. It just blew everyone's mind. She always threw all the birthday parties, hosted the holidays, etc. There's some pretty weird stuff on Google about this place.
That's quite a shift for your aunt. It sounds like she really invested in that lifestyle and the church. I get how the sudden change can catch people off guard. It's hard for everyone involved.
Throwaway because this is personal to someone I care about's life. My brother-in-law was a born Jehovah's Witness, though they will tell you they aren't a cult. He went through a lot of shit. Beatings, encouraged by the church, not being able to talk to his mom for 3 years while she was exiled, and being denied the right to try and pursue his education because the world was going to end anyway. That is actually the first reason he left. He wanted a life, a good job. He met my sister, they hit it off, and eventually got married. My sister is 21 years older than me, so I have known him my whole life. He is my brother in every sense. They now have 2 beautiful boys. His family comes knocking every now and again, telling my brother that him and my sister and nephews will suffer. His father passed away 4 years ago, and he wasn't even allowed to see him before he passed.
It's tough to hear about the struggles your brother-in-law faced growing up in that environment. It's good he found a life and family outside of it. Those family pressures sound really stressful, especially after losing his dad. It's a big deal to break away from that kind of upbringing. At least he has support now.
My parents were involved in what I later discovered was called the Quiverful cult. When I was about 10 they started being influenced by the Vision Forum Ministries. The founder of the ministry later dissolved it after a girl brought him up on sexual harassment charges. They started trying to train me to be a housewife and future mother and discouraged anything otherwise. I wanted to go to college and study science, but I was told that I would be out from the protection of my parents, and that was not the biblical way. I was homeschooled, wore skirts all the time, and had very long hair. My story is deeper and uglier, but I left home just after my 21st birthday and moved in with my grandmother. I worked a whole summer to be able to make enough to start college and completed a whole year of college with very high grades in spite of high school being hard to complete because my parents cared more about whether farm chores were done than my education because I was a girl.
It's rough when your upbringing pressures you into a specific role, especially when you want something different. It's good you found a way to leave and pursue your goals. College can be a big change, but it sounds like you managed to adapt well despite the challenges. Just goes to show how determination can lead to new paths, no matter the circumstances you're coming from.
Not me, but a family member. He got involved in a cult that had this strange compound of trailers. He met a girl and they began dating, and then he convinced her to join this Christian cult. Another family member, same side, is a lawyer. They were not aware of any of this. The girl's family contacted them about it. This lawyer family member knows deprogrammers. They kidnapped her and deprogrammed her. Not sure about how long it took. She was saved. The male family member eventually left the cult. No one in the family on either side knows about it except me and the lawyer family member. I found out quite young, and it really was one of the first times I realized that family is just comprised of people that could be anyone, like a stranger on the street that you pass and think, what happened to them to be like this?
That's quite a heavy story. Cults can really change people. It's interesting how someone can get caught up in something like that, and how other family members respond. The whole deprogramming process sounds intense. It's good that the girl got help and your family member left.
I was raised fundamentalist Christian by a severely mentally ill mother who was physically and emotionally abusive. I was coached to be a pastor. I remember the constant criticism, ridicule, and brainwashing of biblical literalism. It was religious abuse and has ruined that aspect of spirituality for me. I was so enmeshed as a supply for this narcissist I eventually even went to seminary, decided it was bullshit and dropped out. The manipulation has continued well into adulthood. Luckily my wife has helped me see through it and I have very minimal/no contact with most all of my family. The switching between abject neglect to intense intrusive invasion of privacy and gaslighting made the first half of my life a living hell. I consider many churches to be cults. Mine was a personality cult, involving one man's opinion about how a certain religion should be. I woke up sitting in a pew thinking, this guy, nor any of these people, know one more thing about the afterlife than I do.
It's tough to deal with that kind of upbringing. Sounds like a lot of pressure and manipulation from family and belief systems. Dropping the seminary must have been a significant moment for you, realizing what you really believed. It's good you found support from your wife to move away from the toxic environment. Recognizing that many religious groups can be controlling is important for personal growth.
So a very close relative of mine was in a cult up until the 90s. Back in the 70s he was out in the city with his girlfriend at the time. I don't know exactly how this happened, but he was held at gunpoint while 5 black guys raped his girlfriend in front of him, threatening to kill them both if one of them fought back. A few months later, still messed up about everything that happened, he was hitchhiking and was picked up by some members in this cult who basically offered to save him if he came to live with them. He accepted. He got married while he was in the cult, but after his kid was born they both wanted out and moved to this first city they pointed to on a map.
That's a pretty intense story. Sounds like your relative went through a lot. Leaving must have been a big step for them, especially after starting a family.
I was born into it and would describe it as a black nationalist hodgepodge of Egyptology, Christianity, and aliens. I escaped because the leader was jailed for sex crimes and the compound was raided. I was later taken away from my parents, spent some time in foster care and required to attend public school. It was like entering a new world, things were so different. I am now an atheist and refuse to believe in anything else without solid evidence. My parents were naive and very vulnerable, they are no longer involved. It's actually nice to read stories about other survivors. I wasn't aware that there were so many people with similar stories.
It's interesting how those early experiences can shape someone. The shift from being sheltered to navigating public life has to feel overwhelming at times. It's good to hear you're finding community among other survivors. Everyone's path to understanding is unique.
I was involved with Christian Fellowship Ministries for about 5 years. Their church names are The Door, The Potter's House, The Open Door. I got into it as a kid of 14 because I was getting into trouble and was being raised by a widowed mother and no father. I was just trying to fit in and got caught up quickly because they smother you with love and afternoon to get you to join. After I dedicated myself to them, they quickly made sure I attended all services, which was 4+ days a week, was in prayer every morning and asked permission 2 weeks ahead if I ever missed church. I did it wholeheartedly, and the more I read the Bible, the less their doctrine made sense. They were judgmental and controlling, 2 things that are no-nos. As I started to question their doctrine, instead of answers the leaders in power told me to stop questioning. The church is God's bride, and as a part of God's bride I must submit to Christ and his leaders. Anyway, I backslid, which caused me to be shunned, which made it easy to leave after that. Before that they try to do all kinds of things to convince me to stay. It was mostly a bunch of manipulation and guilt trips about living for God and fulfilling his destiny for me. Some years back I read about other people escaping and pointing out their cultish ways. They are not as extreme as the other cults, but this makes it easy to fall back into their ways. My sister has left and gone back several times, and she is persona non grata because she is what they call lukewarm.
It sounds like a tough experience. Getting into a group like that at a young age can lead to a lot of pressure. It's common for organizations to become controlling, especially if they see you questioning things. It's good that you eventually recognized that and chose to leave. Your sister's situation also highlights how tough it can be to break away from that kind of influence. It's a complicated dynamic.
Met a girl when I was 18 and fell in love. She would only date me if I joined her religion, so I agreed to look into it. Was subsequently brainwashed and spent 12 years in until I realized I was in a cult. At the time I was indoctrinated, I was going through substance abuse issues and had gone through a lot of shit at home with my family. I literally felt like I had gained a new family with the religion, and they made me feel so at home. It felt like I was always meant to be there. Took me a long time to realize how oppressive my day-to-day life was. Forced meeting attendance, forced mandatory preaching, literal hours are counted and you are counseled if your hours are too low, and just a general atmosphere of fear and control. They will tell you they are the happiest people on earth, but many were deeply depressed and on meds. They of course attribute it to the dire state of the world and don't for a second consider it might be their religion making them that way. The leaders up top exercise information control and strictly forbid researching or reading anything that contradicts their religion or teachings. You can get exiled for countless reasons, and if you do, then a very strict shunning policy is enforced. Smiling or saying hello if you pass in the street is even forbidden. Families have been torn apart forever as a result. I was exiled last summer and lost everything. My friends and new family turned on a dime and haven't said a word to me since. Been shunned in public by my own nieces and nephews. My best friends all blocked my number and won't reply if I try and contact them. I am extremely lonely, depressed, and likely suffering from PTSD, but I'm out of that cult.
That's a tough story. It seems like you went through a lot just to find a sense of belonging. Realizing you were in a cult must have been a harsh wake-up call. The isolation and shunning are pretty intense. It's understandable to feel lonely and depressed after being cut off like that. You might want to seek support from others who've been through similar experiences. It might help to share and process what you've been through.
I wouldn't say I was really part of the cult, but I was forced to go to Pentecostal church for about 4 years of my life until I told my mother they were full of crap and refused to go. I remember there being bizarre rules. Women were not allowed to cut their hair. There was some weird shit going on with pastors. We had 3 over the course of a year. I remember there being a large emphasis on speaking in tongues as well. A bunch of people stood up speaking gibberish pretending to be empowered by the Lord. Really weird stuff. I'm glad I wasn't forced to stay there once I made my mind up.
Seems like you had quite an experience there. It's good you spoke up and got out of it. It's easy to get caught up in those environments when you're younger. People can get really intense about their beliefs. Just glad you're able to reflect on it now.